The northeast of the U.S. packs in over 50 million people, making it one of America's most crowded corners. But here's the twist. Almost 90% of them live in the southern half of that corner. That leaves the vast northern reaches surprisingly empty. So, why does the most populous region in the U.S. have such a sparsely populated northern frontier? To answer this question, we've got to start with the physical geography. When we think of the American Northeast, we tend to immediately think of the many large cities that dot the region New York City and Boston, being the two obvious examples. Yet, if you venture even just a little farther northeast, a dramatically different landscape emerges. This is America's empty northeast, a vast expanse encompassing northern New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. And despite being nestled in one of the most densely populated regions of the United States, this area stands apart, defined by a rugged physical geography that distinguishes it from its more populous neighbors to the south. The most striking feature of this deep northeast region is its mountainous terrain, a stark contrast to the gentler rolling hills and coastal plains found in the south. While southern New England and downstate New York are characterized by lower elevations and more navigable river valleys, this northern expanse is dominated by ancient, weathered mountain ranges. The Adirondacks of northern New York State form a vast wilderness, home to countless peaks, lakes, and forests. To their east, the Green Mountains form the spine of Vermont, extending into Quebec. Further east still, the White Mountains of New Hampshire boast the highest peaks in the northeastern U.S., including Mount Washington, infamous for its extreme weather. Maine, too, is very rugged, with its interior defined by the western Maine Mountains and vast, unbroken forests stretching to the Canadian border. These ranges aren't merely hills, as they're often compared to the Rocky Mountains. They are significant barriers beyond the mountains. The prevalence of glaciation further differentiates this northern region. During the last ice age, massive ice sheets scoured the entire northeast. But their impact is particularly pronounced here. As the glaciers retreated, they carved out thousands of lakes and ponds, deepened river valleys, and left behind a chaotic mix of rocky soils and till. This legacy of ice means that much of the land has rocky and thin soil, less amenable to large-scale farming than the deeper, richer soils found in, say, the Connecticut River Valley or the fertile plains of central New York. The sheer abundance of water bodies, from the vastness of Lake Champlain to countless smaller, pristine lakes nestled in the mountains, is a direct result of this glacial activity. Another key differentiator is the extensive forest cover. While parts of southern New England are still heavily wooded, the north is overwhelmingly forested to this day. This isn't just scattered woodlands, it's a nearly continuous blanket of boreal and temperate forests, especially evident in northern Maine and the Adirondacks, which collectively form one of the largest unbroken tracts of forests in the eastern United States. Even to this day, after centuries of deforestation, it remains a dominant feature, supporting industries like timber and paper, and providing critical habitat for wildlife. Finally, the climate of the region plays out differently between the north and south. While all of the northeast experiences distinct seasons, the northern part endures longer, colder winters with substantially more snowfall. Its higher latitudes and mountainous topography contribute to a harsher climate. This isn't to say that the South is tropical or Mediterranean, but the difference in average temperature and the length of the growing season is noticeable between the North and South. All of this is to say, while the Northeast is broadly considered to be a singular geographic region within the United States, there are stark differences as you cross from the lower parts of New York and New England and into the north. The vast expanse of America's empty Northeast may seem sparsely populated today, but it's not that nobody has ever lived there before. In fact, from ancient indigenous people to European colonization and the eventual formation of the individua. Hell states of the United States, there have always been people living here. But unlike the rapid urban growth of southern New England, settlement here was a prolonged affair. Now, naturally before European colonization, this landscape was home to thriving indigenous nations. The Abenaki, particularly the Western Abenaki in Vermont and New Hampshire, and the Eastern Abenaki in Maine left a big mark on the land. Their extensive network of trails followed river valleys and mountain passes connecting communities that are now state and international borders, from present-day Quebec down into Massachusetts. These trails were not just routes for travel, they were arteries of trade, communication, and cultural exchange. Meanwhile, in northern New York, the Iroquois Confederacy exerted significant influence. With their territories extending towards the Adirondacks, these indigenous peoples would be among the first to encounter Europeans when they began to arrive in the 1600s. European interest in the region began early, but they primarily stuck to the coast in Massachusetts and southern New England. As such, it was primarily French explorers and traders who established early outposts in the northern region, particularly along the waterways connecting to Quebec, influencing areas of Vermont and northern New York. The English, expanding northward from the Massachusetts Bay Colony, focused more on the coastal regions of Maine and the southern parts of New Hampshire. However, the dense forests, harsh climate, and fierce resistance from indigenous populations often allied with the French during the colonial wars made permanent agricultural settlement slow and perilous. Unlike the relatively swift land grabs of southern New England, establishing firm control and clearing land in the north was a painstaking process, often marked by conflict and hardship. The end of the French and Indian War in 1763, which mostly removed French influence in North America, opened the floodgates for more concerted British settlement. Land speculation became rampant, particularly in Vermont, which was claimed by both the colonies of New York and New Hampshire. This overlapping claim led to the unique situation of Vermont declaring itself an independent republic in 1777, a no-man's land for 14 years, before finally being admitted as the 14th state in 1791, balancing the number of free and slave states in the country. New Hampshire, with its vital port of Portsmouth, was one of the original 13 colonies. Its settlement pushed inland from the coast, grappling with the White Mountains and eventually establishing its western border along the Connecticut River. Its transition to statehood was a direct part of the American Revolution as one of its founding states. Meanwhile, Maine's journey to statehood was tied to Massachusetts for centuries. Maine was simply the District of Maine within Massachusetts, its economy heavily reliant on timber and shipbuilding. As its population grew and its economic interests diverged from those of Massachusetts, particularly regarding the War of 1812 and trade policies, a strong movement for independence emerged. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 provided the perfect opportunity. Maine was admitted as a free state, balancing Missouri's entry as a slave state, thus becoming the 23rd state. Northern New York, while part of the vast state of New York, followed a similar pattern of late and difficult settlement. The Adirondacks, viewed as an impenetrable wilderness for much of the 1700s and early 1800s, only saw significant, albeit limited development with the rise of the timber industries and later tourism in the mid-1800s. Its integration into New York State was a given, but its physical geography ensured a different developmental trajectory than the fertile Mohawk Valley or the bustling Hudson Corridor. Suffice it to say, the northern region of New York and New England has been part of the United States for a long time, certainly long enough to become a more densely populated region. So why haven't more people moved to the area? America's empty Northeast is a geographic paradox. it lies within the most densely populated corridor of the United States. Yet, its population of just 4.9 million people is roughly equivalent to the Boston metro area alone. And in fact, if we take the entirety of southern New England and southern New York, an area roughly equal in total area size as the empty Northeast, you get a population nearly 10 times greater at over 46 million people. This striking demographic anomaly isn't accidental. It's the cumulative result of a powerful interplay between its distinctive physical geography, its challenging history of settlement, and the economic forces that have shaped its development. At the heart of the region's enduring emptiness is its formidable physical geography. As we've explored, this is a land dominated by ancient, rugged mountains like the Adirondacks, Green Mountains, and White Mountains. These ranges are not just scenic backdrops, they are significant natural barriers in the same way that the Rocky Mountains are. Their steep slopes, rocky terrain, and high elevation historically made large-scale agriculture extremely difficult, especially compared to the fertile river valleys and coastal plains found further south in states like Massachusetts, Connecticut, or downstate New York. And even if you did take the time to clear the land for settlement, an immense task, you were treated to soil that wasn't great for agriculture, and land that didn't hold much mineral value. This was the pervasive legacy of glaciation, which left behind thin, acidic soils and countless lakes, and wetlands, land that just wasn't very valuable compared to southern lands. The sheer extent of forest cover is another key factor. While forests are a vital part of the region's allure and economy today, for much of its history they were a formidable impediment to settlement. Unlike the more open prairie-like lands further west, establishing a farm or town here meant felling vast tracts of old-growth timber, a backbreaking endeavor that made expansion slow and costly. This isn't to say that southern New York and New England didn't have vast forests, but given their proximity to the coast and more valuable land, there was more of an impetus to clear and settle them something that just didn't exist in the north. And, of course, the climate also plays a critical role here, with longer, colder winters and heavier snowfall than much of the rest of the Northeast. The growing season is shorter, and the costs of heating and maintaining infrastructure are higher. While people certainly adapt, these factors historically presented significant disincentives for large-scale migration and settlement, particularly when more temperate and agriculturally viable lands were available elsewhere in the country. But it's not just the physical geography, there's also the fact that this region was consistently contested throughout the 1600s and 1700s. Constant conflicts with indigenous peoples who fiercely defended their lands, and the prolonged rivalry between the French and British powers kept much of the interior a dangerous frontier for over a century. And even after the French and Indian War had concluded and the region became safer to settle, another war was beginning to bubble up: the American Revolution. This war, of course, stymied settlements because the British used Canada as a primary base of operations, turning the region once again into a battlefield between two sides. Finally, when all was said and done, and the area became fully part of the United States, with the inclusion of Vermont in 1791, the country became more interested in settling and pushing people to its western regions beyond the Appalachian Mountains and into the Great Lakes area, rather than pushing people north toward its still confrontational border with British Canada. And once the U.S. acquired the Louisiana Purchase from France in 1803, there became a desperate rush to get even more people out west in order to legitimize their claim to the land, something that Spain, Britain, and, of course, the indigenous peoples of the area didn't accept at first. But also, the land's limitations meant that the few farming ventures that were marginal at best, and the lack of natural resources prevented other industries from popping up. Unlike the industrializing southern New England, which saw waves of immigrants from Europe drawn to Factory jobs, the empty Northeast lacked the industrial pull to attract and retain large populations. Its economy remained largely extractive and reliant on timber, granite, and fishing industries that, while significant, do not typically foster high population densities, even today. The region has struggled to diversify beyond these traditional sectors. While tourism and outdoor recreation are growing, they often lead to seasonal populations or second homes rather than permanent year-round residents. And the lack of significant urban centers, with the exception of smaller cities like Portland, Burlington, and Manchester, means fewer large-scale employers, research institutions, and diverse economic opportunities that attract and retain young professionals and families. In fact, it has gotten so bad that states like Maine and Vermont have enacted policies to pay people to move to the state. Today, the empty Northeast maintains a population just a hair under 5 million people, which is just over 1% of the entire United States population. This is incredibly low when compared to the single metro region of Boston, which has just as many people. The empty Northeast is mostly empty because during a time when Americans were spreading far and wide, most were heading west where more valuable land was located. And this is a trend that we continue to see today, where the Northeast region continually ranks among the lowest in terms of population growth.